you're in the right place. This is the Eatfluencer Podcast, and I'm your host, Dr. Maggie Landis. Together, we are going to unpack everything about eating and discover the what, when, and how that will let you lead your best life. This is not your doctor's conversation about nutrition. Today is when you can start to love eating again. Let food be food and you be you. Get ready to get eatfluenced. Welcome back to the Eatfluencer Podcast. Glad you're here. I'm Maggie Landis, and I'm the host, obviously, here. If you're new, you came for a good one. This is episode 54, Intuitive Eating for Athletes. And I have a guest today, Dr. Cindy Dallow, you're going to love. But if you do not identify as an athlete or, sports performance is really not something that's on your priority list, don't go anywhere. This episode is still for you. Cindy Dallow, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about what she does in a moment. But the reason I wanted to have an expert like her to, present and kind of debunk some of this information is because it is a very, very diet culture-y way of thinking that what we eat and how we move our bodies is related in this real transactional economy. And whether or not you train for major, athletic events, or your idea of, sports is walking around your front yard, with your kids throwing a ball or whatever, we still in our heads have been conditioned to believe that, we have to earn our food by burning calories and exercising, and there's some sort of, payback methodology between eating and exercising and moving our bodies. And that's a really toxic place to be, no matter what level of athleticism you perceive, your space to be. Dr. Dallow is somebody that has been working in this intuitive eating and non-diet health space way longer than it has been, quote, trending. She is, in my eyes, sort of one of the OGs of non-diet sports nutrition. She's a certified intuitive eating counselor, a registered dietitian. She herself is an accomplished athlete. She's got a doctorate in nutrition. She's a scientist, a health coach, and for years, and to be honest, decades, has been an expert in these topics when it was not as, discussed in sort of any type of mainstream conversation. But she understands truly at its essence how food and nutrition interacts with the body, and knows with her clients and with herself how to approach the proper fueling and preparation for sports performance without falling prey to a restrictive, real boxed in diet culture way of thinking about food. That's the long way to say she is a super cool human with lots of experience in the non-diet space. And I know that you're going to get a lot out of our conversation today, whether you consider yourself to be an athlete or not. So without further ado, let's get to Dr. Dallow's interview. All right, Cindy. Well, I'm so glad you joined me today on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Well, I'm so excited about this conversation because, I haven't had anybody as a guest yet that has your level of experience, both in this anti-diet intuitive eating culture and in exercise physiology and sort of athletic performance. So my question first, before we jump in, is how did you get here? Because I know you're a dietitian. I know you have a doctorate and all these things. And this is very countercultural to the norm. You know that.
Yes, it is very much so. I came to this place of working with athletes and helping them with intuitive eating because that's what I experienced myself. I've been an athlete most of my life, and for the last 30 years, I've been doing, running and triathlons and competing. It's a passion of mine. It's something I've done ever since I was a child in terms of just exercise. And I love sports. I like competition, and it's my jam.
So
So,
how did you get there, even just personally then? Because this is not what you're told, I'm doing air quotes,
right,
told to do when you're
right,
an athlete, especially
right.
an elite type athlete.
Yes, well, and I'm not an elite athlete. I'm just your average athlete, but it's a huge part of my life is training for triathlons. I went through all the same things I think a lot of us did back in my 20s, obsessed with my weight, very much fat phobic, did not want to gain a pound. I never really dieted, like I never really went on specific diets, but I was always watching my calories. And back then, because this was in the 80s, my fat intake, because
Oh yeah, because in
so
the
fat.
80s,
Yeah.
man, fat was
Yes.
the enemy,
Yes.
number one enemy.
Yeah. So I went on a very low fat diet. I did lose a lot of weight and got a lot of compliments and attention for that. And so it kind of cemented in my brain
Yeah.
to, do all that kind of stuff. But as most of us have found out, it's not a fun way to live. And it got to me after a while, and I went through a huge change in the 80s. I met Ellen Satter, who is, I think, the pioneer of intuitive eating, and was getting my master's in nutrition at the time, which, is
Right.
not a surprise. And I went through this just total mindset shift. It took a couple years to completely change my thinking about weight and health, about weight and athletic performance, about body image, about eating, all of those things. It was a huge shift, and I had a lot of people that mentored me and helped me through this. But
Sure.
but after I made that change, I told myself I will never go back. I will
Oh
never
yeah.
go back to that. And I want to help other people make this change too. So that's when I went back for my doctorate, or it was kind of in that same time. And so now I work with athletes. I work with sedentary women too, but I help athletes, female athletes mostly, to stop dieting and learn to eat and be flexible in their eating. And I teach intuitive eating. I am a certified intuitive eating counselor. I went through the training for that. And so I use all of those principles in my counseling with athletes.
Right. Well, and it's interesting that you say, once you kind of came to, you'll never go back, because you can't unsee the harm.
Right.
Like
Right.
when you're in it, you can't see it any other way. But once you are open-minded and really start looking, and I know you are like science minded like I am. I mean, nobody has that number
Very
of
much so.
letters after their name and doesn't read science, but
Yes.
you realize that the science supports this way of doing things rather than the restrictive, really boxed
Oh,
in,
very
you know,
much so. Very
yeah,
much so. And because I train for triathlons, and I actually am certified as a triathlon coach, and my husband is a triathlon coach, and he does triathlons, and probably 90% of our friends are runners and triathletes. So I associate with a lot
sure.
of these kinds of I don't want to say these kinds of people, but other
You're
people.
very much active in that community. Let's
Yeah,
just say that.
very active in this community. And I would say a good half to three-quarters of them know nothing about intuitive eating or any of this. And I listen to things they say about eating and about weight and performance, and it is just amazing, the prevalence of restrictive eating in triathletes and runners, I guess. And it's not surprising, but it even blows me away sometimes. And I look at how um, I I guess I see the way they eat and live as almost a little sad, because I feel like they're missing out on so many wonderful experiences of just enjoying food and life. And not worrying about their bodies so much.
Right. And I mean, eventually most people don't want to have that level of like white knuckling their behavior. I mean, like
Right.
you can do it kind of as you described yourself in the 80s with the low fat diet and the training all the time. Like we can make ourselves do it. We can sort of override our programming for some period of time. For some people, that's 1 week. For some
Right.
people, that's a few months. Some people, it can be even years. But at
Right.
some point, I always say the house always wins, like the
Yeah.
body is going to win this argument in the end.
Well, but there's people who are dieting until the end, and they're restricting the entire time and never make that shift.
Well, that's sad. That
Well,
is
that's
super.
how I
Yeah.
see it. And
Yeah.
I have a very close friend of mine who's also a dietitian, and she's a very, very passionate intuitive eater as well. And we talk about this all the time. Like, gosh, I'm so glad we've said this so many times to each other. I'm so glad I'm an intuitive eater because just the things we hear from the athletes that we work with and how obsessed they are with eating healthy and eating well healthy and eating a certain way, whether it's paleo or whether it's vegan or whether it's whatever. They're very, very obsessed with that, and it colors their life. It really does.
Right. So let me ask you this. If somebody who's very entrenched in that belief system, right? And they're an athlete, they're training a lot, they're counting macros, logging everything, every calorie, every bite has to be done at a certain time, a certain way.
Yes.
And they say, no way, Cindy, no way. There's no way I cannot do this. Like, what's the first entry level commentary when you're like trying to just scratch the surface of what's possible for these people?
Well, that happens all the time.
I'm sure it does. Yeah.
Yeah. So I work with a lot of female triathletes. And when they come to me, they don't know anything about any of this. There's hold on 1 second.
Oh, no worries. No worries. Well, they're probably in a little bit of disbelief that this is even a thing. Like they're like, you're sort of like you're kind of crazy talking to them. Right?
Yeah. And they'll say things like, well, I can't do that right now. I'm training for an Ironman, and or they'll say, oh gosh, this is the one that most people say, oh, if I ate when I was hungry, I'd be eating all the time, and I'm thinking, and what's wrong with that?
Yeah, okay. And
well, chances are, and as you won't be when you're really in tune with hunger and fullness. No, you're not eating all the time. But there's that inherent fear of eating. There's the fear of weight gain, the fear of eating, and definitely the fear of eating too much. God forbid you have 2 servings of something. That's just terrible, right? So I have to approach it very carefully because they're coming to me for nutrition for sports performance.
Right.
I have some triathletes that come to me for intuitive eating because they've heard that that's what I do. So that makes it much easier. But the ones that come to me to help them train for a triathlon, usually it's a half or a full Ironman distance race, which is a very long race.
Yeah. So you say you're not an elite athlete, and maybe within athletic circles, that's not elite, but to me, that's like way elite.
Well, it's not elite. My finish times are definitely not elite.
I watch those on TV. Yes. And I realize the word elite means something very specific in athletics, but
right. I would love to say that I'm elite, but I'm too stubborn to quit, I guess. But so I have to approach the topic very carefully. And honestly, I don't start off with intuitive eating because if they come to me and they have 8 weeks before they're doing a full Ironman, that really
that's not enough time. Yeah.
That's not the time to be doing intuitive eating anyway. So what I do though, is I do talk to them and work with them on sports nutrition to help them have a good race, because nutrition does affect how well they do. It will affect just the experience of the race, because if they're not eating enough, chances are they're going to hit the wall and end up walking the rest of the way. And that's not fun for anybody. Nutrition also very much affects GI issues. And so that's really important. So if we only have a short time, then we would just focus on eating well, getting enough carbohydrates, because that is important for endurance, and enough protein for the rest of the training season to support their training. But I approach it from the standpoint of, this is what's going to help your body perform better. It's going to help you to have the experience that you want, and not so much from, because a lot of them come to me still with, they don't want to gain weight, because
Right.
in the triathlon world, because of biking, there's this belief that everybody keeps talking about the power to weight ratio, meaning that the more you weigh, the slower you'll be on the bike.
Okay.
So they're still thinking, I don't want to gain weight. I don't want to gain weight, even though they're preparing to do a race that has 140.6 miles of.
Right. Well, and then the undereating. So I would imagine undereating is like a big problem, right?
I don't know if I've ever worked with a triathlete that overeats. I mean, it's almost always undereating, and especially amongst female triathletes, but it is in male triathletes as well. And so I still approach it from the standpoint of trying to connect more with their body, because that's what intuitive eating is about, is connecting more with the body and kind of getting out of their head, and where they're thinking, well, I have to have so much carbohydrate, or I can't have too much carbohydrate. I can't have, they're all about macros.
Right.
Macros.
Right.
And so I help them pay attention to hunger, pay attention to fullness. I encourage it. Knowing that we can't get into it that deeply with that short a time frame. But I also have a lot of athletes that hire me 6 months out before their race. And then we have a lot more time to get into the principles of intuitive eating, and which the last one is nutrition, as you know, gentle nutrition. And that has a place. And that's where, when we get to that, that's where, yeah, it is good for you to have carbohydrates, and carbohydrates are a great source of energy, and there's nothing wrong with eating them. And I do try to stray them away from macros and just talk about nutrition and how it is, it is good for your body, but that eating is okay, and paying attention to all your internal cues of hunger, fullness, how you're feeling, your emotions, how being active, how training makes you feel. If you're too tired, and this happens all the time,
I bet.
They keep training even when they're tired. Some of my running friends do this all the time. They do a 10-mile run one day, and the next day is a 3-mile recovery run. I'm like, you don't run 3 miles to recover. Recovery means don't run. So it's all about tuning in and paying attention to the body and listening to the body.
Right. And it's interesting to me as you're talking, people at this level of athletic performance are usually quite tuned into their body's physical needs and what their body can do, and their sort of feedback from their body from a physical, performance sense, but then extremely dissociative with the nutrition piece, right?
Yes. Well, you're so right. I mean, we are, I will say, myself included, we're very tuned into like any, how our body feels, and definitely to every ache and pain, because it, makes us panic that we're going to be injured and can't race. So, but it is, there's a disconnect though, between that being in tune with your body and performance from the standpoint of more is better. That's what everybody tends to think. A lot of athletes think more is better. Well, I need to be swimming, biking, and running every day. I need to go the extra 2 miles every day. And there are coaches out there now that are rethinking all of this and trying to get athletes to take time off, to rest, that it's okay to have a day that you don't train. But it's hard. It is
Sure.
really hard. It
Well,
actually
and
takes
this,
me a while to do that.
yeah, and the same thinking I'm sure applies to food that, if a little restriction or, sort of structure is good, then more is better. And so,
Exactly.
the
Exactly.
more they end up in
Yes.
that pattern of overtraining, undereating. And
Yes.
certainly when you look at the bird's eye view of that, that is not an optimal performance
No.
sitch package.
No. Well, and studies have shown if especially for female athletes, if you're under eating for young female athletes, you risk, problems with your menstrual cycle, with fertility issues if it gets really bad, definitely lower bone mineral density. You can get, injured much easier. Also, when people are under eating and overtraining, which happens all the time, their immune systems take a hit, and then they're more susceptible to getting sick, and also probably more susceptible to getting COVID as well. I don't know if there's any studies that have shown that, but I do know that athletes who overtrain and undereat get sicker much more often than those who don't.
Right. And I can't imagine much being worse than prepping for 6 months for an Ironman and getting a virus like the week before your event or something. I mean,
Oh,
that's
I
probably
know.
about as bad as it gets.
I know a lot of people that's happened to, or they get a stress fracture, which I think had to do with under eating. A lot of it
Yeah.
had to do with that. So
Interesting.
yeah, it's I worked with one male athlete. I used to work at the Boulder Center for Sports Medicine in Boulder, Colorado, and I'll never forget one male cyclist that I worked with who he would eat during his training season. On some days he would eat nothing but power bars, nothing, no
Oh,
food. I know, I'm like, oh dude. I
okay.
don't know how you do that. But he was very, very concerned about the power to weight ratio. He knew how many calories were in a power bar. This is probably 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, and there weren't as many bars out there as there are now. And so he that's how he had control, is that he would have like 2 power bars for breakfast and like 3 for lunch. And then,
Delicious.
but he
Yeah.
that was his thing. And so I think that happens a lot in both male and female athletes.
Right. Well, and the other thing is if you train your mind to view food in this way, at some point, if you end up no longer being an athlete and doing this level of activity, but you just approach food in your life like
Yes.
this is
Yes.
where this disordered eating and
Yes.
potentially even eating disorders
Yes.
kind of can stem from. A
Yeah.
lot of them are former athletes who have dragged that level of restriction into their quote
Oh,
regular life.
oh, definitely. Oh, I would say a lot of recreational athletes think this way as well. You
Oh
know,
yeah.
just very much focused on calories and macros and not eating too much, and definitely not gaining any weight. That's just like the worst thing that could ever happen.
Yeah, of
So,
course.
so
So
it
let's
yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I want to shift gears too, because you mentioned just the recreational athlete or the quote kind of normal person.
Uh-huh.
And I know that you also work with people to keep them from being sedentary, because
Yes,
the literature shows that the chronic health risk and stuff happens when you are sedentary. It
definitely.
doesn't say that things are prevented when you do Ironmans. It says
Oh, no, no.
don't be sedentary. It says, and so people have this misconception that it has to look a certain perfect way to exercise, or it doesn't
Exactly.
count.
Exactly. That is my passion, actually, right there, is helping women. I work mostly with women. I do work with some men. See that you do not have to be thin to be fit. You do
Right.
not have to be thin to be fit. Cardiorespiratory fitness level, which is how well a person can do on a treadmill, and there's a way to measure cardiorespiratory fitness that has clearly been shown. And I'm sure you know this, but I want to I just really want to
Reiterate it, please.
reiterate it, that several studies have shown that cardiorespiratory fitness is an independent risk factor for lots of health conditions and for living a long life, meaning that it is not based on weight. And so many people think, well, if you're fit, or if you want to get fit, you have to lose weight. And that is not true. you can be fit and fat. And I think people have heard that before. It is very much true that you can be fit and fat. But what I think is helpful for people to remember is that you can work on your fitness and not work on weight loss. You can increase your cardiorespiratory fitness whether you lose weight or not.
Right. And that's it. And you can feel a difference in a fairly short period of time.
Exactly. Right. And that's the thing. So I know a lot of people say, yeah, but I still want to lose weight, and that's fine. And I understand that. And I
that's a whole other conversation.
That's a whole other conversation. But exactly. But I want people to realize that you can improve your fitness, and many people do, with no change in your weight. And there's huge health benefits, huge, much lower risk of heart disease, much lower risk of diabetes, of some forms of cancer, of osteoporosis. Most people, when they become active on a regular basis, they sleep better, they feel better, they think better, they're more confident. I mean, there's just so many benefits to exercise and fitness, regardless of weight loss occurs or not. And I like to help people break that connection between fitness and weight.
Because we've been conditioned to think that those are the same things.
Exactly. And they are not at all. I know so many women who are very fit, but probably by today's standards, they're considered large sized. I don't use the word obese because I just don't like
that. They're probably, I'm sure their doctor does though. So you can count on that. Yeah.
Right. So they are larger size, but they can walk or run. I know one woman in particular who's a large woman, and she runs half marathons all the time.
Yeah.
In the triathlons I see people of all sizes and shapes. That's one good thing about triathlons is, I think, at least my experience, is that it's, even though you do have the traditional lean, looking kind of triathlete, there are people of all sizes and shapes out there doing these races. But the reverse is true. We all know there's very skinny people who are not healthy, who are not.
Oh yeah. Dime a dozen. We can find them anywhere.
Exactly. But society considers them healthy because they're thin, right?
Right.
Not the case at all. Not the case at all. So you cannot judge health or fitness by looking at a person.
So how is the average person who wants to be in motion, not be sedentary, and they don't, obviously we don't have access to a fancy exercise physiology lab where we're measuring our VO2 max, all this kind of stuff. What are the things, like, how do we know as individual people, how is this improving? Like, are we looking for a change in our blood pressure? Are we looking for a resting heart? Like, just maybe some sort of objective things.
Yeah, definitely. Resting heart rate is one. That's a really good one. If you take your heart rate first thing in the morning, and then as you start exercising, take it again a month later, it should come down. There are some fitness tests that you can do on your own that are not, as good as a treadmill test, but good enough. There's one called the Rockport walking test. You can just Google that. It gives you all the directions on what you do. Ideally, you find a high school track, and it goes through all the instructions on how to do it, but it gives you a pretty good idea what your cardiorespiratory fitness level is. It's the Rockport walk test. Just Google that. And then do that maybe once a month and see how you do. But I think more importantly, what people what they will notice is just in their daily living, they're not as out of breath. They can walk farther, they can do more in their daily lives and feel good and not feel out of breath or tired.
Right. And it's just like carrying the groceries in and picking up your kid and
picking up a kid, exactly. Somebody asks you to go for a hike and you find, oh, wow, I can go a little farther than I thought I could.
Right.
All those things. And to me, as that's quality of life. And that's so important to be able to do the things that you want to do and do them easily. And that's what fitness gives or provides for us, is the ability to do the things that we want to do.
Ooh, that's good. That's a good place to land this plane, Cindy. I like that, because there really is this, and I'll say, because I believed it for a long time, that, exercise and fitness had to look a certain way, that What I did had to look a certain way. I had to look a certain way. I had to wear certain clothes. I had to be in a certain place.
Right.
And when you throw all that out the window, it's actually much more appealing to want to move.
Much more appealing. And I think there's a lot of people out there learning that right now. So you're not alone if you start doing that and getting out and just doing what you want to do, regardless of what you look like or your weight or anything, and just do it because you want to, and you can.
And it will improve your health. Really, that's the bottom line, is that.
Right.
Yeah, because when people all come to me and they say, I want to lose weight, because everybody has this cultural conditioning to lose weight, and that's a whole other podcast. And then you say why, and then they say, well, I want to be healthy. So then we work on separating those two things.
You can be healthy at a wide range of sizes and shapes.
Right. And so I think you have given us a lot of great, really practical advice on what that health might look like or feel like without the scale, because we don't need that.
No, it is not the be all end all marker of health that people think that it is at all.
Right. Even if your doctor, even if your dietitian, even if your personal trainer is telling you all those things.
Yes.
Listen to us. We know what we're talking about. Exactly. Well, I want to go ahead and kind of wrap up here. If you'd like to tell my audience, where they could find you if they want to learn more from you or even participate with you as a client, where would they find you?
Sure. Well, I have a website, a business called My Body, My Life. And the website is mybodymylife.co. It's not .com, it's .co. They can find me there. I'm on Instagram as Dr. Cindy Dallow, RD. You can also just email me at cindydallow@gmail.com. I answer all emails, and I'd be happy to just chat with somebody, set up a time to talk.
Fabulous. And I will put all those links and your email address and everything in the show notes so they can just click if they want to access all that. Thank you so much for this conversation.
You bet. Thank you for the time. I enjoyed it very much.
Well, you're very welcome. I will have you back again.
Okay. Thanks. Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed that. She's such a light and really knowledgeable about not only intuitive eating, but obviously sports performance, and has done such a wonderful job helping athletes train to the highest of their potential and not getting stuck with the dieting and the restrictive eating and the disordered eating and all that stuff, which is so common, and even more common in the, most elite group of athletes. So I have all of Dr. Dallow's links, her social media links, her email, all of that for her business, and her contact information is in the show notes. And I hope you connect with her and see if there's a way she and her practice can serve you. I want to also just remind everybody before we sign off today, if you are a woman looking to have more anti-diet conversation and be in a weight-inclusive, supportive community of women trying to leave diet culture behind, looking for the next thing to improve their life without dieting, I want you to consider my Facebook group. If you send me a message or click on the link in the show notes, you will get your invitation to the private group, and I look forward to seeing you there. Thanks again for joining me today, and we will see you next Wednesday with a new episode of the Influencer Podcast. Thanks again. Thank you so much for being here today. If you love what you've learned, follow me on social media at Maggie Landis MD, and you'll never miss a thing. You can also check out my website at maggielandismd.com and sign up to be part of our community of eaters. Thanks again for stopping by. We'll talk again soon.